Hi everyone and welcome to this new coloured pencil masterclass. In this class we will be obviously focusing on this really super fluffy adorable donkey. I actually did a donkey tutorial in grayscale a couple of years back, but the quality wasn't that great, so I decided that I would remove that off Patreon and re-film this. So we're going to be working in colour, because that's a little bit more fun. Well, it's not more fun, but it's just a little bit more complicated, if anything. But I feel like we'll be able to get a lot more depth if we do it this way, which is obviously what I absolutely love. There's a lot of little details in this piece, and yeah, it's just going to be about layering and building the colours up and trying to create that really fluffy texture, and sort of focusing more, as always, on the shapes than every single detail. But obviously the main focal point is the face. Everything else sort of like is slightly more blurred out. So we really want this bit to be the main focus point. And how we're going to achieve that is obviously by just doing lots of layering and building everything up very slowly. So I'm starting off with just mapping out the darker parts of the eye. I'm using Polychromos Dark Sepia. Obviously my pencil is very sharp at this point, just to really sort of get in there and just focus on these details. So again, just not really getting too carried away with sort of pressing too hard at the moment. I'm just trying to establish where those darker areas are. We've got a little bit of a light area in the corner of the eye. So again, just trying to leave out those lighter areas and just sort of just going around and then adding a little bit more depth, a little bit more sort of that dark pencil, just in the heavier parts of the eye, so the heavier darker parts. One thing we don't want to do is we don't want to work too heavily in those darker areas, especially at the bottom. I think one of something that we can sometimes get carried away with doing is really sort of circling around the eye and really making that really dark, but it's never like that actually in real life. Like the eye is always curved, so we want it to sort of like look like it's coming away. Sometimes if we put a too thick a border around the eye, it can just make it look quite flat. So obviously I'm going to try to avoid doing that. We've got a sort of a greeny tone in the centre of the eye, so I'm going to start off with taking a little bit of raw umber 10%, very lightly with the luminance into that inner corner. I've then got a little bit of cold grey. I think this is like cold grey 5, but in all honesty you could probably use cold grey 4, because we're just going to very gently just map out roughly that darker pupil of the eye, just to give it a little bit of an outline. Again, I'm really just dusting the paper with my pencil at the moment. I'm really not pressing hard at all. And then I'm just going to take a little bit of the cold grey too. Going around the outside of the eye, and then using a little bit of the raw umber 50%, just to help give the eye that sort of greeny tone. And then noticing where the shadows are. So as I said, there's like a curvature of the eye. So we're just going to try and just blend out any of those darker, harsher lines underneath. And just putting a little bit of colour into the pupil. leaving out that highlight. Obviously with colour pencils, we're always trying to work from light to dark. So just gently going up into the top part of the eye, and then again just coming in and adding another little layer of the raw umber. And then a bit more of that cold grey 5 just underneath. And again, you'll notice I'm not pressing too hard at the moment. I'm just trying to just let everything sort of do its own thing. Just blending the layers all together. And then we are just going to take a little bit of silver grey from the luminance, just to, again, just gently come into that top light section. And then I'm just going to take a little tiny bit of the Payne's Grey from the luminance. This is the darkest Payne's Grey, so it's the darkest sort of bluey tone. It's quite, yeah, compared to the polychromos, this is definitely sort of more of that bluey, deep grey kind of tone. It's, yeah, I don't really know the best way to describe this colour. It's lovely. Like, and if you have watched any of my classes before, you'll know that I absolutely adore working with the luminance pencils, because they're just so soft, smooth and buttery, and they can just blend so beautifully, especially on a surface like Fabriano. And then we're going to take just a little bit of the darkest raw umber from the luminance and just pull that into that inner corner where it's just a little bit of that darker, richer green kind of tone. And then I'm going to take a little bit of the and then I'm going to take a little bit of the Payne's Grey from the polychromos. So the difference between the polychromos and the luminance, this is a sort of a slightly deeper, darker, almost more blacky kind of blue, rather than the I would say the luminance has definitely got slightly more of a blue tone to it. It's sort of like whereas this one's a slightly like deeper, kind of richer colour. So I'm just trying to create a little bit of like a highlight by just working around. And then I'm going to just come in again and add a little bit more of the raw umber just into that inner highlighted area. And again, backed. And then I'm just going to take a little bit of this is the silver grey from the Pablos. And again, just going over to create a little bit more of that bluey kind of tone. Before going back in with the Payne's Grey and just really re-emphasising a little bit of that Payne's Grey, that darker kind of tone. And then again, just a little bit more of that raw umber. Deepest raw umber. Just going into those sort of inner corner bits, just to try and help blend out those darker lines. Just adding, that just helps add a little bit more depth into the bottom and around the eye, and then just putting a little bit of polychromos black into that pupil right in the centre, just to help create a little bit more depth. You might find that you have to press a little bit harder with adding the black at this stage, just purely because obviously we've put quite a lot of layers down. And I never like to sort of really go, as I said, in with any sort of circular motions to really sort of like hammer in that dark colour, because like that it just looks a little bit false in my opinion. So I always like to try and soften any sort of harsh lines that I kind of put in. So again, I'm just going to take a little bit of maybe like a bit of the Payne's grey from the luminance, and I like to use the luminance to kind of soften the outer corners, just to create a little bit more of a softer transition between the dark areas and the lighter areas, because like with everything that I teach, and whenever it comes to any sort of animal portraits, it's very, very unusual and rare that there's any harsh lines. So in my opinion, that now looks a lot softer. And again, just by using maybe a little bit of luminance, like silver, this is the silver grey, over the top of those lighter areas, we're just going to create a nice sort of really soft highlight through there, just to really give it that pop of light. Okay, so now we're going to just come around the upper side of the eye. Now we've got this dark sort of browny kind of line through across here, but just below that we've got a sort of beigey umbery kind of texture. So again, just going to put in a little bit of the raw umber, 10%, and then at the bottom of the eye here we're just going to go in with a bit of the cold grey too. And then again, just continuing with that cold grey too. Just coming down underneath the eye a little bit. And I think it doesn't really matter what colour we go in with just above the eye, because we're going to be darkening up, but I think it's always important just to put a little bit of like a base underneath whatever colour, darker colour we're going to go in with, because it just creates a bit of a softer, more natural blend. That's personally what I find anyway. So that's why I'm just taking a little bit of raw umber, 10%, because it's just a sort of quite a fail-safe for something like this, and obviously it can just blend into the bit we've put up there. And then we're gonna just take a little bit of the buff titanium just into that lighter area above the eye here. And just using my mono eraser just to remove that graphite line through there, underneath there. I'm just going to continue just mapping roughly where a little bit more of that texture and that detail is going to go. And I think just using, again, it doesn't really matter what colour we're going to put in underneath, I don't think too much, because we'll be going over it. So I'm just going to use a little bit of the brown ochre just in that corner there. Obviously there's a little bit of a lighter corner and the lighter area just through here. And again, I feel like I'm just going to take a little bit of the silver grey. I like to use the illuminance for the majority of base layers, just because I feel like I get a much smoother, softer kind of result. So again, just in that, where any sort of yellowy textures are going to go, we're just going to take a little bit of the brown ochre, and then maybe a little bit more of the raw umber, bringing that raw umber just underneath. And then just again going just slightly above where we've put the raw umber over here, we're going to use a little bit of brown ochre. I'm blending that into, again, a little bit more of the buff titanium, just to create that nice, smooth, sort of lighter area. And again, just bringing a little bit of that buff titanium just ever so slightly underneath the eye here. So hopefully you can see where I've sort of left out a little bit of those lighter areas through here. And we're going to take a little bit of the cold grey Foal, and the cold grey 5. I'm sorry, this is cold grey 6. This is the darkest cold grey before we start going into Payne's grey. And again, just beginning to look at flicking a little bit of that bluey tone up and out into that darker area above, bringing it a little bit further down. And into. And then I'm going to take a little bit of walnut brown, just because it looks like it's got a little bit of like a browny kind of deep tone just above. And again, I'm probably going to use a little bit of dark sepia to sort of blend that in between the raw umber. And then just taking, again, a little bit of the brown ochre from the luminance and just pulling that over the top of the buff titanium with a little bit of the brown, sort of burnt ochre. Using the burnt ochre because it's got this sort of really nice peachy kind of tone, and I feel like that's kind of what I'm seeing in the reference photo. And then just again, we've got this little deep shadow through underneath. So again, just working very, very gently, always making sure that I've put enough of a base layer underneath so it sort of carries the colour, and it just allows the soft blend. I feel like if I didn't have that going on, I wouldn't get that soft blend. Now, one thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to take the slice tool just to pull out that highlight. Well, I didn't know whether that really worked, but I wanted it to work. Maybe it did, maybe it didn't, who knows. Worst case scenario, I can just take a little bit of white. So I'm just going to take the Museum Aquarelle white. And just use that as a bit of a highlight underneath the eye. And into any lighter parts of that eyeball. And then going over any darker parts again, just with a touch of black, just to really emphasize and try and make those darks as dark as they need to be to really sort of make this eye kind of pop a little bit more. Just like to flick up and into the eyeball. And then again, just taking a little bit of the raw umber, just blending and softening out that line. Okay, and then I'm going to take a little bit of the burnt umber from the Polychromos. Again, just because this burnt umber is a little bit more of like a reddy tone than the walnut brown. It's a little bit sort of brighter. And again, I'm just going to flick that lightly out. And then use a little bit of the raw umber, 50%, sorry, just into the top, and just use circular motion just to blend that in before going in, probably with a little bit of the dark sepia, and just blending. And then using the darkest raw umber, again just to help create a little bit more contrast. And then, I know I'm jumping around the pencils quite a bit, but it's because this area is so little, we just want to build up the contrast. So again, just taking a little bit of the dark sepia and just running that across any of those areas that we just want to make a little bit darker. Before, again, just picking up some of the raw umber. And then any lighter areas, we're just going to use a little bit of silver grey and the white, just to help really blend that back in. Because I you know, it is very important to still have these sort of contrasted areas, and you can kind of tell that the lighter areas have got a little bit more of a bluey tone than they have anything else. If you compare that to sort of the creaminess of what's underneath, this has definitely got a much more of a blue, cooler hue to it. Hence why I'm using a lot more of like the Payne's grey than I am anything else. And again, just tiny little pencil strokes coming into where we've put a little bit of that brown ochre, and again, just continuing now, adding a little bit more of the buff titanium just to add into this sort of creamy texture or creamy area. And then we're just going to blend a little bit of the brown ochre and then some of the burnt ochre as well, just using a really light pressure, just coming out from there, and we can just blend that over the top of that burnt buff titanium, sorry. And we can just put again another little layer of the buff titanium over the top. And then blending it with the brown ochre to kind of create that softer kind of effect. And then we are gonna take, I'm actually also gonna take just a light pressure of some of the sepia 10%. Just gonna gently run that towards the sort of orangey, more orangey toned areas, and I think I'm just going to try and blend them out a little bit, probably using a bit of let's try a little bit of cold grey too. We don't want to press too hard with this, but I feel like there needs to be a slight sort of transition colour, and I feel like using the polychromos will be the right thing to do, because they are a little bit sort of harder and the colours are a little bit sort of like lighter. So, you know, you could also probably go in with a bit of buff titanium. Basically, it was just trying to create a little bit of a lighter sort of finish, and more blended. We're just trying to push a little bit of that pigment into the paper just to create, again, a nice soft transition. And you could probably use as well a little bit of the burnt sienna 10%, just to again give us that nice pinky kind of tone again, which will push nicely into the sepia 10% that we've got. And then again, just creating nice sort of bluey tone with that cold grey, and then taking a sepia 10% just really lightly over the top. This colour is super pigmented, so we only want to press very lightly, and I also probably think I'm being a little bit lazy, and I should be using the Cold Grey 1. I think using the lightest colour possible. We're basically just trying to push a little bit of the pigment into the paper to kind of burnish it, which again will just smooth it out, and it would just allow us to go in over the top with different details. So, you know, and basically when we've softened it in a little bit more, then we can go back in with the sepia and kind of create a little bit more texture. So like some of the fur strokes. And again, I feel like if we just focus on adding as much of the burnt sienna to kind of create that pinky peachy tone underneath, and really sort of go in and layer up these colours to make our base quite smooth, it would just allow our top layers to go on really, really seamlessly. So again, just pushing a little bit of that brown ochre into the sepia, and then just taking a little bit of the raw umber again. And then just using some of the Cold Grey, as I said, just Cold Grey 1 to help blend. I'm going to take a little bit of the Vista, which is a little bit probably more yellow than what I can kind of see in the reference photo, but I don't know what other colour will sort of work as well, because I feel like I want to be using the polychromos pencils, because that's how I kind of achieve detail, and I sometimes feel like the luminance, as beautiful and as lovely as the colours are, they are a little bit too saturated, whereas using the polychromos is just slightly softer. So again, just trying to sort of gently create a little bit of texture. And you could also probably go over it with a bit of the burnt sienna, again from the polychromos. And then again, just creating a little bit more of that bluey kind of texture, well, bluey tone above that orangey area, just by using, again, a little bit of the Cold Grey 2. And then we can just blend ever so gently some of that sepia and some burnt ochre, into that area. And blending again a little bit of the burnt sienna. Okay, so then I'm just gonna take a little bit of this is the coal grey Foal, and just pushing, blending ever so gently into that more orangey toned area. And then again, just creating a little bit more. Just pushing a little bit into these lighter areas. And I'm also just going to come below the eye fractionally with a little bit of the French grey 10%. Now this is a slightly more sort of neutral grey. It's more of a warm grey than a cold grey. And we're just going to gently use this to help blend just away from the underside of the eye where it looks like it's just got a little bit of that warmer texture. So we're just going to gently just bring our pencils, sort of flicking them down. And just following the direction and following the shapes that we can see around the eye here. And again, because especially if you're using a surface like Fabriano, it can take so many layers. So don't be afraid to sort of really go over different areas quite a few times. There's nothing wrong with doing that, and that's kind of how we layer up and how we work on the hot press watercolour paper. So again, just going to blend and push a little bit of the buff titanium into there, using a little circular motion just to bring that up. And then we got a real lighter area underneath, so you can take a white of your choice. I mean, I've obviously to hand have got a little bit of the Museum Aquarelle, but you can use the Polychromos white or the Luminous white, whatever you have got to hand. And then I'm just going to take a little bit of the buff titanium again and just pull that across and into the white. It's just going to give it a brighter, creamier kind of texture. That's not going to be as dark as if we were just to go in with the buff titanium. And then again, because we've got this light area underneath the eye, we just want to be removing the graphite. We don't want that to be sat there because it will show through. And then we're going to take, again, just a bit of the buff titanium and just pull that across and pull that in, and just ever so gently just building up and pushing in to the sort of the white that we just put in. And also you can obviously go back in with the white and just really sort of crisp up and freshen up that lighter area. We have got a little bit of a sort of a texture and a deeper, darker, sort of more neutral kind of tone under the eye as well. And I think the best colour to probably use for that would be a bit of the raw umber. So again, just going over the top of where we've put that buff titanium. So we use white and then buff titanium just to create a little bit of a base, a light base, and then we can just gently go in and start adding a little bit of the raw umber. And then again, we're just gonna create a little bit of more depth by adding a bit more of the cold grey for just into that corner, and then putting a little bit of the sepia 10% around the eye. And again, just taking a little bit of the cold grey. And then some of the French grey, 10%. Just again into those warmer kind of areas. And then we've got this browny tone that's kind of sat through here. So again, just gonna take a little bit of that brown ochre, and also a little bit of the burnt sienna, just to create a bit of that pinky tone. And then again, a bit of raw umber. Just spending a little bit of time just really sort of like playing around with these colours and blending them into each other, because again, it's that sort of like softness, it's blending all these colours together that are going to create the right sort of texture. And then if we want to create a little bit more of that warmer grey tone, that's when we're going to go in and put in the French grey. And again, just a bit of the buff titanium. And then some of the burnt sienna. And then again, just blending between the two. So obviously you can see where I've left the graphite line through there, which isn't ideal because it's quite a heavy dark line, but we will be able to just put more colours over the top to sort of like remove that. I think even just adding a little bit of burnt ochre, again, just to create a bit more of that peachy tone. Okay, so now we've sort of established, again, some of those base layers. We can just start to gently create a little bit more depth. So starting off by going above the eye. One thing, when you've put enough base layers down, your pencils will just sort of glide on. You'll be able to get a much softer sort of result. I often find. So again, just gonna create a little bit of texture, trying to follow the direction of the fur, and again just pulling out and into that lighter area, creating a little bit of structure around those darker parts, and blending a little bit of Payne's grey. So just very, very gently and lightly, just starting to pull in a little bit more colour. Again, if you feel like you've got a little bit too much of like a blue tone going with the Payne's grey, then just drop down and use a little bit of the cold grey, sort of 6 or 5, which is going to give you a more sort of neutral finish. It's not as sort of dark as and then again we can just start to bring in a little bit of that fur direction around the eye. And then again, just going to look at taking a little bit of the French grey. This is the middle French grey, so it's the French grey 30%. And I'm preferring to use the luminance over adding the polychromos, especially when we're just building up these sort of tonal base layers. We're just trying to create the right amount of depth in and then again just bringing down a little bit and blending some of the raw umber 10% underneath the eye, going in a little bit with some French grey 30, sorry. Again, just lightly following the direction of the fur. We don't want to press too hard at all. Then we can just drop down as we go into that lighter area and use a little bit of the French grey 10%. And then just to create a little bit more of that browny kind of tone, we're looking at adding just a tiny bit of the raw the burnt umber. And I know, I'm jumping around a little bit because I'm beginning to add a little bit of the cold grey into, this is cold grey 4, into this area over here. But that's only because I'm just trying to make sure that I'm building up to have the right amount of depth. One thing I really don't want to do is make an area too dark too quickly and then really struggle. So I'm just sort of jumping around a little bit to try and create a little bit of balance around this piece and around the eye and the face. So again, just working and just trying to create little bits of texture. This isn't as dark as we can go. Obviously there's a lot more scope to go and add a lot more of a darker area, but this is sort of how we're going to work it for now. And again, just creating a little bit more of that French grey kind of tone underneath the eye here. Still trying to leave that lighter area going through. We don't need to add every single detail in as much as I always try to and want to. We don't need to. So again, just trying to just blending a little bit of the brown ochre in, and then using again just a little bit of the raw umber. Just pulling that in a little bit more. And then just a little bit more of the burnt ochre. And then a bit more white underneath, just to again pull out a little bit more of that highlight. It's going to help soften over at the top as well. And then again, I've got the cold grey. This is the cold grey 6, and just adding some tiny little pencil strokes, working in the direction. Now, one thing I wouldn't recommend is trying to not go in too heavy at the start, because I want to kind of create a bit of softness, and then over the top we can go in and add some of those sort of final details. And just gently trying to create a little bit of sort of texture. So I've just picked up some of the cold grey 5, just purely because I think I wanted just a slightly lighter kind of finish. Just means I don't have to be so light-handed, which is something I do really struggle with, to be like that, really light-handed. And I know, again, I'm sorry, I know I'm jumping around, but I'm trying to just create as much sort of texture and depth as I need. And then I'm just going to take a little bit of the dark sepia and just run that. And again, I think I'm just going to add a little bit of dark sepia just into that is like my worst fear in life, I think, that sound of like pencils dropping to hard floor. But it happens all the time, and there's nothing that I seem to be able to do about it, because I work on a slightly angled desk and the pencils just have a tendency to roll off. So yeah, it is what it is. But I'm just putting in a very light layer of some of the burnt sienna. Okay, so then I'm just going to take a little bit of the cold grey too. Through here. I'm working it ever so slightly down. I'm not removing the graphite through here just purely because we were going over it with a darker colour. So it's not, I don't feel like it's essential to have it like completely removed. I'm just lightly just mapping around where the dark areas need to be. And then I'm just gonna take my cold grey 5 and I'm just gonna gently just begin to add with a really light pressure some of that texture. And then pulling that towards those lighter sort of peachy kind of areas. And again, just bringing a little bit of that. Always following the direction of the fur. And we're going to be using variating pressures to create the texture. And I'm also just trying to look at the shapes that I can see rather than every single sort of hair detail or fur detail. Just trying to draw clumps more than anything else. So I'm never going to just put in like stroke after stroke. I'm always going to sort of try and draw in more clumpy textures. And then I'm just going to take a little bit of the burnt umber. And again, as we start to work towards coming into this orangey area, I'm just going to take a little bit of the dark sepia, the sepia, and just again focus on just blending a little bit of that texture into that lighter area. And then again, just buff titanium and just smoothing. And then again, a little bit more of the French grey. I'm putting a little bit of that French grey over the top of the coal grey, just to help blend it. Obviously we're building up these layers, we've still got a long way to go before we kind of reach those final details. And I think adding a little bit of black into these darker toned areas will just help pull out and add a little bit more structure. And then just blending a little bit of the burnt umber. And then I'm going to take a little bit of the Payne's, and am I going to take Payne's grey? No, I don't think I am going to take Payne's grey. I think that's going to wash it out a little bit too much. I think it might be nice to add some of the warm grey, like a warm grey 5 or 6 maybe. So starting off with adding a little bit of the warm grey 5, I don't actually know if it's going to be dark enough, and I don't think it is, looking at how that's sort of laying on top. It's very much, I think, because I've added some of the cold grey 5, I think it's very much sort of like balancing it out. But that said, for some of these darker areas and where there's not that much like detail, it's quite, you know, I'm focusing more on the shapes. I think it's quite a good idea just to go in and add and then again just adding a little bit more of the Payne's grey just over. I often feel like adding, because if there's like an orangey toned area, which there is in this instance, adding a little bit of like a blue tone will just make that area pop a lot more. It's like that juxtaposition of those two colours just really makes quite a big difference. And then I think I'm just going to start adding again just quite a lot, not pressing hard, but a little bit more pressure with some of the burnt sienna. And then again, just taking some of that white and just blending it out. And then just taking the burnt umber and then a little bit of the dark sepia. And just trying to, again, just create a little bit of shape. And then maybe even going in with a tiny bit of black over those darker areas. Again, because we've put so much colour down underneath, I feel like we can just justify going in with a little bit of black. But as soon as it goes into a little bit more of a lighter area, that's when I'm going to just change and use, you know, a little bit more of a lighter colour, i.e. some of the, like the cold grey 5. And then just, again, just creating a little bit more depth. Just trying to draw the textures. And then as we come into using sort of like more of a lighter, well, going into like the lighter area 3 here, that's when we can probably drop down and use a little bit of the Payne's grey just to keep within sort of that bluey kind of theme. Again, just focusing on adding texture in the right direction. And then obviously we've got quite a dark area going up above the face, well, across sort of like the forehead, and we've got quite a lot of texture. But this is quite a neutrally kind of dark area. You can see how hard I'm kind of pushing with my pencil there to try and get a smooth finish. I'm not even pressing that hard, I wouldn't even say. I'm not being that heavy-handed, but I think I'm just getting a bit maybe carried away. And I've just created a little bit of a line through there, so I want to get rid of that. And then I'm just going to, again, go into a little bit of dark sepia. Just creating and then going over it a little bit with some of the Payne's grey, just again to just try and remove some of that texture and add a little bit more depth. So always trying to go for contrast over detail. It's really important that we try and sort of get that really kind of deep colours. Again, just creating and then again a bit more of the coal grey to underneath. And then taking some of the warm, this is the warm grey 5, and again just following round with the direction of the fur. So coming down and out from the middle of the face, and then we're just going to use a little bit just to blend into then a little bit of the burnt ochre. Just to create a little bit of lightness through the top sections through there. And again, just focusing on adding a bit of Payne's grey and adding to the depth. Just lightly again, just creating a bit of direction. And again, in fact, I'm going to use just the cold grey 5 above through there, just because it looks super dark. And then I'm just going to take a little bit of the dark sepia and then again just using variating pressures just to build up these layers in the face, and then using a little bit of the burnt umber. Again, just to create a little bit more depth around the eye. And it can be quite difficult, especially I wouldn't recommend having like super sharp pencils, but we really do just want to focus in on creating almost like little tiny triangles of or pockets of fur. We never want to just really go in with one heavy layer, and we never just want to go in with sort of one fur, like one line. Fur is always sort of quite clumpy, so we kind of want to make it look as clumpy as we possibly can. So that does involve adding lots and lots of layers. A colour that we could go in with the luminance over the top, just to again add a little bit more softness, would be some of the luminance, some of the sepias. So again, I've just got a little bit of the sepia 50%, and just gently creating, again, just a little bit of texture. I think we could also probably go in and use some of the black again, just to really sort of emphasize a little bit more of this depth. But really trying to create the illusion of fur. And like get a real nice sense of depth through there. And then again, just a little bit of the Payne's grey. And again, no, it's very repetitive. I'm just taking a little bit of this burnt sienna and just blending that into some of that area through there, just to give it a little bit more of a lift. And we could also probably take a sharp silver grey and just work at a few highlights. Or you could equally use the slice tool to kind of get that same result. And we're just gonna knock any areas that are a little bit too light back. With some of the Payne's grey and just focusing on adding a little bit of texture in the direction of the fur. If you feel like you're not, you maybe have overworked an area, you can just, because we've used so much luminance, you can just take your slice tool and just gently, using the sort of rounded side, try and create a little bit of a lift. And then again, just go in with some of the silver grey. And that's kind of there, it's looking a lot better. So again, just going to carry on just adding, or removing even, and then adding little areas of silver grey, just to really pull out some of that texture. And just going over some of those highlights. With some of the silver grey, just to give it a little bit of lift. And then working some of the black into those really dark areas. And then again, just pulling down some of the cold grey. So you're using cold grey 2 and then going in with a cold grey 5, and we're just going to start to, again, just pull down some of this detail. So you're not using the most sort of sharp pencil, we're just going to gently just create some quite thick hair stroke lines. Right, it's a new day, but I'm just gonna get straight stuck in, I think. I want to get around, like, my aim is hopefully to get the face done at least today. I've got a good few hours. I've actually got someone coming round to have a look at my fireplace. So I ripped it out when I first moved into this house. And for the last year and a bit, it's just been a blank hole in the wall. So I'm wondering what they can do. Maybe put like some sort of like burner in it, or like a log burner or something like that. So yeah, that's my only commitment today. And he's coming around about 2 o'clock. So, and it's, what time is it now? Just gone 7:30. So we've got lots of time, hopefully. So I'm starting off by taking a little bit of the raw umber and some of the burnt ochre, and just combining them together into this light area down the face, like just underneath that darker part of the eye, like this bit here. And then I'm also just going to take a little bit of the raw umber and just pop that just again underneath the eye ever so slightly. I'm going to remove that heavy graphite line that I've put in there because I don't want that to be showing through. And then I'm going to take maybe a little bit of probably a bit of buff titanium, just through those lighter areas. I don't think it's all kind of that important to be including all of that detail, but I think like all the sort of like clumpy bits of fur, but I do think it's important to just try and get the colours kind of accurate. So I'm blending a little bit of the raw umber 10% on top, and then just going in with a little bit of the cold grey too, just to in any areas that I've got a bit more of a cooler kind of tone. And again, just blending that with a little bit of the raw umber 10% to sort of give us that neutral kind of finish. And then again, coming up here and removing the graphite before I take a little bit of the cold grey one just into that lighter area through here, and then again blending a little bit of the raw umber 10%. And also maybe a fraction of the French grey just over any areas that have got a slightly warmer tone. And again, just blending a little bit of the luminance over the top will just smooth everything in. You can hopefully see how smooth that area is now. And it's not me pressing hard, it's literally just using a combination of, the luminance really. And obviously light layer of the polychromos to kind of give us that bluey kind of tinge, and we can bring that over here. Sometimes it's quite nice to have a little bit of that cooler tone underneath, and then where it looks a little bit warmer, that's when we're going to take in a bit of the French grey over the top. And again, you don't want to be pressing hard with the luminance at all because they are quite pigmented, and they can sort of push the tooth of the paper in a little bit. So we just want to keep everything super, super light and soft. And then we're gonna, again, any areas that have got a sort of darker, cooler tone to them, that's when we're going to be taking the cold grey too, and just bringing that down. And bring that around the eye there. Again, just noticing where the shapes are. So we've got a sort of a bit of a line that's coming down here. So I'm just putting a little bit of the cold grey one in before we go in with some more grey, just to, again, just not brighten everything up, but just give it that more like warmer kind of tone. And then I'm going to take a little bit of the French grey. This is the French grey 30. And just, again, focusing on the shapes that we can see around the underside of the eye. It's just trying to just create a little bit more depth. Just gently working up in the layers. Again, I'm not focusing on adding every single sort of bit of detail. I'm just trying to just create a little bit of depth. Around the eye there. And then again, any areas that have got a little bit more of that cooler tone, that's when I'm just going to take some of the cold grey. That's just the cold grey 5, and once I'm sort of happy with the depth that I've kind of got, I'm going to just take a little bit of the Payne's grey and a bit of the warm grey 5, just taking the warm grey 5 into any of those areas that have just, again, I feel like a bit of a broken record, but just got that sort of warmer tone, and we're just trying to just create little sort of details. So again, just focusing on adding So again, just bringing in these layers a little bit, just building up a little bit more of that colour around the eye, just working in a very, very soft and controlled sort of movement. And then we can just maybe take a little bit of the raw umber. This is the darkest raw umber from the luminance, just to again give us a little bit more of that browny olivey tone. That's just looks like it's below the eye. Again, just lightly, not really working in the direction of the fur, because I'm just trying to glaze a little bit of this colour over the top, just to sort of tone the paper. So I'm going to take a little bit of the warm grey 6. This is the darkest, obviously, warm grey before we start looking into the sepia kind of tone. And again, just focusing on adding a really light, don't want to press too hard, because again, we smoothed out the sheath of the paper, so this, whatever layers we put on top will be quite pigmented still. And then we're just going to create little details. And again, we can, if you feel like your pencil markings are a little bit too harsh, don't worry, because we can obviously just come in with a little bit of like a light luminance colour. So I'm taking a little bit of this silver grey and just going over the top and just sort of smoothing and blending them out a little bit, which is just creating that sort of nice out of focus, softer effect. And then again, just building sort of layers going down the face. Just getting it to the right depth. And then we're just going to, again, just take a little bit of the sepia, dark sepia, and just run over any areas, again, that just need to be a little bit darker. And noticing where there's a bit more of a browny tone as we go into that light sort of peachy pink area. So I'm just going to take a little bit of the burnt umber over the top of that cold grey, just blending that in to give us that nice sort of chestnutty tone. You also just use it to just soften out those darker lines with the, it's quite a dark line that I've got going through there, so which I'm not really that happy about. I kind of want to smooth it down a little bit more, so I might take a little bit of the buff titanium over the top and just circular motions, just smoothing that line out a little bit and just bringing that into the top of the cold grey. And again, just a little bit more of the brown, the burnt umber. And just toning and glazing over the top of that warm grey that we've put in, just to again give it that browny tinge. You don't want to press too hard because you obviously want the details to still be there underneath. When I say I'm glazing, I'm literally just using a really light pressure, small circular motions, or just some little line work, just to try and soften and just tone the paper, just to be a little bit more of the colour I'm after. Then I can just go in over here and add a little bit of the burnt sienna, just to go and give it that peachy kind of pinky tone, which again will just help soften the area out a little bit, and just blending that into a lighter area through here. Okay, so then we're just going to take the cold grey 2, and again just bringing that down the face, just using this as a light base layer. I'm really not pressing that hard, and just bringing that into that lighter section in the face. And then again, we can just take maybe a little bit of the burnt ochre, just over the top, just to help blend out that sort of peachy area. And again, just blending through here. Trying to think about what colours to use. I think I had a toss up between using the cold grey and the warm grey, but I think I'm going to stick with the cold grey for now. I think because there definitely is a cooler kind of tone. It's definitely a lot more blue tone in this area. So again, just gonna circular motions just to make sure everything is nice and blended, because we're just trying to again build another layer of colour. We're trying to get to the right level of depth before we start looking at adding any of the details. I think sometimes we can get very, very caught up in adding all of the details too early, and there isn't enough depth in the piece. So I think trying to make sure that we're going in and really sort of making sure that an area is dark enough. So we're trying to get to that, like that colour that we can see pretty much, and then we just go in over the top and add the details. So again, just going to take a little bit of the warm grey 6. And again, another little layer of the cold grey 5 just to help blend. I also think maybe adding a little bit, a light pressure of some of the Payne's grey. Again, just to try and get a little bit more of that depth in. And then we could just lightly, hope this is angled okay, I always feel a bit weird when I work above like this. Just really, really gently just coming in and adding some little details. Okay, so again, we're gonna just come over here with the cold grey, not going too close to that graphite line as of yet. Just gonna slowly build up a little bit of this lighter sort of bluey tone on the head. Bring that in, light pressure, just smoothing down the paper. And then that's gonna allow us just to go over, probably with a little bit of light pressure, the warm grey 5 I'm using at the moment. It's just gonna, might look a little bit, it's not gonna look as smooth as what if we were to just put like a bit of the illuminants down. But we're just trying to tone the paper at the moment, and then we can just work backwards and forwards, you know, adding a little bit more of the cold grey just to again help smooth everything down a little bit more. And then again, just a little bit more of that warm grey. And obviously some of that cold grey. So just going backwards and forwards between the two, so coming closer into the centre of the face. And we've got this like light area through here. It's like it's got that sort of ochre kind of colour, but I'm just gonna take a little bit of the buff titanium to begin with, and probably just use a little bit of the brown ochre, 10%, just coming out the bottom, just not being afraid to sort of push this into where we've put that cold grey. It might give it a slightly more, no, I think it's given the right sort of tone actually. And then we can just come up and go around. And then I'm going to take a little bit of the warm grey 5 and just bringing a little bit of that down. I'm not going to take it too high into that area just yet. And so swapping between the cold grey and 5 and the warm grey 5, just depending on whether I'm sort of feeling a more bluey kind of tone or whether I want a sort of a warmer one. There's definitely some areas around here that's definitely got that cooler kind of finish, so that's why I'm sort of taking a little bit more of that cold grey. And you can see hopefully how much that smoothed everything down again. And it's just going to allow us maybe to go in with a little bit of the Payne's grey and just lightly start building up some fur texture. Again, working in sort of small clumps. And then again, just bringing in a little bit of that warm grey, just to balance out that blue texture, and also it can sometimes just give us a bit of a deeper, richer finish by combining the two. It's not very often that I really want to go all in with a lot of cold grey. I think it's sometimes it can be quite nice, but I think because there is quite a balance of greys in this piece, well, I'm trying to balance the greys out a little bit more probably than what they are in the reference photo. In the reference photo, it's got a lot of cold grey, but personally I like to try and put a little bit more warm grey in it, just because I feel personally it gives a slightly more natural, neutral finish. Again, it's personal preference. You can do obviously as and what you wish. And then I'm taking a little bit more of that warm grey. This warm grey 5, and again just blending over the top a little bit, coming into coming into that sort of more textured, fluffy area above the face, and just taking that warm grey 6 and again just working it in the direction of some of that fur, paying attention to where there isn't that much detail and just sort of focusing on the shapes and trying to push some of that pigment in to create the right sort of tufts. And again, you can just go in with a light, I mean, I'm using the cold grey too over the top of some of that detail. Again, it's just going to help smooth down a little bit of that layer, that top layer. And again, just going to take a little bit more of the cold grey 2. And just work that, not taking it too close to those graphite lines. We're just going to work then lightly taking it a little bit further towards the down, like the bottom bit down here, and then we're going to need to transition from that cold grey into that sort of like more neutral beigey kind of orangey tone, and then into the white of the muzzle, which I'm not going to touch just yet. I think I'm just going to again just focus on adding a little bit more through here. We've got a little bit of a warmer grey on this side, and then obviously we've got some of that orangey kind of texture. So again, just going to start removing a little bit of the graphite, just doing it in sections because I don't want to take too much off. And I'm going to use a little bit of the warm grey one as almost like the base, and just pulling that into where that cold grey is. And I'm going to take a little bit of the raw umber, 10% from the luminance again, which is going to help smooth everything down, but it's also going to give us that really nice, more neutral kind of finish on this side. And then I'm going to take a little bit of that brown ochre, and then just putting in some of that cold grey. Before, I think I'm also just going to blend a little bit of the burnt ochre, 10%, which again is slightly more orangey. And then we can just slowly start to look at building up a little bit more of that colour. Probably just, it's quite difficult to kind of know what colour to go in with straight away. Maybe a little bit of the Bista, I don't know whether that's going to be a little bit too yellowy, but I think maybe, I don't know. If not, my fail safe would probably be just to go in and use a little bit of the burnt umber, and again just focusing on building up tiny little pencil strokes to create the sort of texture. And we can do this obviously because we've put so many layers underneath for the like base to build that up a little bit. And then we can just blend some of that cold grey And then a bit of the Payne's grey over the top. Then blending again, just a little bit of the burnt umber over the top of that Payne's grey, which is just going to neutralise a little bit of that blue tone and give us a really nice sort of bit of depth. And then we can just go in and maybe add some of that warm grey 6, working in really small light sections. And then again, that coal grey 5, just to deepen a little bit more of that colour. And to add a little bit of that reddy kind of tone over this edge here, I'm just going to take a bit of the burnt sienna, just very, very gently, and just glazing that a little bit over that side. And again, we can just go in and add a little bit more of the warm grey. Just trying to focus more on just adding the shape. So now I get very caught up with adding the detail, but for the most part I'm just trying to get everything to be dark enough to kind of create the texture and the structure. And that's why I go over certain areas so many times, to really sort of build up and get that real sort of tufty kind of structure going on with the fur. That's what I try and do anyway. And then I'm just going to take a little bit of the burnt ochre, and then a little bit more of the burnt umber, just to bring that down a little bit more. And then just focusing a little bit of that depth just over the edge. And again, what you could use is maybe a little bit of the dark sepia at this point. Again, just to really sort of try and go in and just deepen and darken the outer layer. And then I'm just going to run a little bit of that dark sepia over some of those more tufty areas. So basically when we're drawing fur like this, we're always trying to work in reverse. So we're trying to draw the shadows and what's like around and underneath the fur, rather than actually drawing the fur, if that makes sense. And then again, another little layer of the coal grey too, just to again help smooth everything down a little bit more. not afraid to take this over the top of what we've just done, which again is just going to help smooth it all down a little bit more. And then creating a little bit more of that bluey tone going up the head. And over this side it does get a lot lighter, so I'm not going to go in with the warm grey 5. I'm probably just going to use a slightly lighter colour. So I'm going to use a bit of the warm grey 3 just over the top. And working down okay, so we're just going to come over this side, noticing where there is a darker areas and sections of fur compared to the lighter ones. And those lighter areas, obviously we're just going to be removing the graphite. And then taking a little bit of the cold grey 1, just gonna lightly go towards that edge where it gets obviously a lot lighter. Being careful not to go too close to the graphite. And again, just pulling up and then once you're relatively happy with that, then obviously we're just going to come in with some of the cold grey 5 just to come over this side and just start building up a little bit more of the contour and get some more of the depth in, looking at obviously where the darker areas are and trying to just create those little light shapes around those areas. And then gonna look at just getting some of that Payne's grey. You can probably tell by now, well, I hope you can kind of tell that it doesn't really matter all too much whether you go with like warm grey or like a Payne's grey or anything like that, because obviously we're just trying to just create a little bit more depth. We've still got a lot of depth still to add. So we're just trying to create a little bit more contour really and get that area to be a little bit darker, but it doesn't necessarily matter all too much because we will be going over it with darker colours. I'm probably going to take a little bit of dark sepia in here just to knock out a little bit of that blue, so it kind of is a little bit more in keeping with everything else that I'm putting in. And then if an area's got a little bit too much sort of like warm grey, then that's when I'll probably go in with a little bit of the Payne's grey just to sort of balance it out and create a bit more of like a neutral kind of finish. And then again, just taking a little bit of the warm grey 5 just over and then we can just again go in with a bit of the warm grey 5, warm grey 6, not taking it too close to the edge over here because obviously that's when we are gonna be just transitioning into that lighter fluffy area. But especially through here where there's not an awful lot of detail, this is where we can really sort of come in and just clump the bits of fur together. So I'm using a light pressure to begin with. I'm not focusing on really having a mega sharp pencil. I'm just using a relatively light pressure just to try and build up a little bit of like the tuftiness. Again, just coming over. Noticing how I'm leaving out those little like lighter areas and using a light pressure just to go in and just create a little bit of like contour and a little bit of detail over sort of that eyebrow and going up the face. Always working in the direction of the fur. And then again, just coming in with the cold grey 1 over the edge and then a bit of the cold grey 2 going up. And then removing just ever so gently a little bit of that graphite at the top. Then we can just take the cold grey 1. And then again, just not really focusing on the direction of the fur because I'm just trying to build up a little bit more of that depth of colour. Just taking the cold grey 5 and just blending into this area. Okay, so then we're going to take just a little bit of the cold grey 1 and just bring that again up to that graphite line that we've just removed, I like to just work sort of in circular motions. I never like to just bring down the line, just because there's a small bit of fluff here. So I feel like if we just use circular motions, it will just create that illusion of softness, rather than having it sort of like super harsh and just like a blunt line. And then obviously just gonna blend a little bit of the 1 in with the 2, so we will start working down towards that darker area, and just putting in a little bit of 2 just again where those shadows are. And then again, just coming further on down the face, trying to keep with that sort of like light, fluffy, circular motion. And it looks like it's got a slightly different kind of tone going down there, so I'm going to put a little bit of the warm grey 2 over the top, just along the edge, just to give it that whole like fluffy, sort of more neutral grey. And then again, just coming over the edge there. And going back in with some of the coal grey. And again, just picking up some of that warm grey too. And just really emphasising. And then again, we've got this area just on the eyebrow or the eye bone here, which is sort of a little bit brown ochre, and it's sort of like that peachy kind of tone. So I'm just going to use a light layer of some brown ochre, 10%, which is going to give us a little bit too much of a yellowy tone. So I'm going to just go over the top of that with a little bit of the cold grey, and also a little bit of the raw umber. And sort of blending that raw umber between that peachy kind of area. And then another layer just over the edge, just to give it again less of that yellow tone, more of that peachy tone. I'm going to take a bit of the burnt ochre, 10%. And then we're just going to take that cold grey, cold grey 5, and just pull that And then using a super light pressure, we're just going to take the burnt sienna from the polychromos and just try and tie that into that sort of ready area through here. And again, if you feel like it's a little bit too light, or you know, I've got a little bit of a gap there of lightness, so I'm just going to add a little bit more cold grey. And then just taking some of that burnt umber. And a little bit of the warm grey 5, just to start to build up a little bit more structure. And then again, just taking a little bit of the Payne's grey. And one thing I would say is if you feel like you've got too much like of a contrast between those light areas and the dark areas, excuse me, just take a mid-tone. So like I'm taking a little bit of the cold grey too, and I'm just sort of trying to blend those two areas together a little bit. And then obviously we can just come in over the top, maybe with a slightly lighter colour as well. So I'm using a little bit of the warm grey 5. Just to kind of create a little bit more of a deeper, kind of richer kind of colour. And again, putting in a little bit of the cold grey too, just into those deeper areas, darker areas, and then a bit of the cold grey 5. And again, not focusing too much on fur direction at the moment, just trying to build up to be the right sort of tone or depth of colour. I think it's more accurate to say. Okay, so we're just going to start to darken using a little bit of the warm grey 6, and I'm really just slowing down my pencil strokes now to really try and get a little bit more of that contrast and the detail in. I'm working just in a very, very concise, sort of relatively slow sort of movement, just to, again, just focus on the shapes I can see. And something that I often will say when I'm sort of doing anything like this is something I got taught many years ago is look twice, draw once. So always double check your reference photo, make sure that you are absolutely happy with sort of like the direction and everything that's going in before you sort of put pencil to paper and really make that move. So I can see like through here we've got a little bit more depth going on, so again just gonna create that slightly more like a structure. And as we come towards the mid section here, I'm just going to take a little bit of the brown or the burnt umber, and just being very careful to leave a little section of lightness in the middle there. Okay, so then we're just going to take dark sepia and just running that over the top a little bit. Again, just to create a little bit more depth. And then again, just taking a little bit of the cold grey 5, just blending that. And then again, just coming back up to the top here and just starting to create a little bit more depth with some Payne's Grey. So focusing on the direction of the fur. And then I'm going to take just a little bit of the silver grey from the Illuminance, and again just go over some of those lighter areas just to again soften them up a little bit and give them a little bit more of that sort of lift. And then just going in over the top, some of those real darker areas with some warm grey 6. And again, just focusing on the sort of clumpiness of the fur. And then when we start to sort of transition across the top to come into that lighter area, that's when we're just going to start dropping down into some lower cold greys. So I'm going to just start off with a bit of the cold grey 5, light pressure, and just start creating a little bit of the fur strokes along the top there. And then again we can just go in with a bit of the warm grey. So just sticking with that warm grey 5, just again just creating a bit of a blend there, and obviously we can just come in with the cold grey. Rubbing out the graphite, and then again some cold grey 1 just over those lighter areas just to keep them super soft. Then when we go into again the darker areas, that's where we're just going to use a bit of the cold grey 2. Just blend. Blend that all together with some of the cold grey 1 in those super light areas. And then again, just taking the warm grey. This is the warm grey 3, because again, I just want it to be a slightly more neutral, natural, lighter kind of tone. Don't want it to be too cold. And then we are just creating and then a little bit of the Payne's grey. The polychromos, again following the direction of the fur. So just blending and softening areas out. Again, just still trying to keep building up to get to the right sort of structure and contrast. Still got a little way to go before we sort of reach an area of depth. You see how deep and dark this area is. We need to get the rest of that area to be as sort of as dark as that, really. So that can take a little bit of time to do. I'm going to remove the graphite through here, and then just bring in some of that cold grey 5. And then So just keep with the cold grey 2. I'm just building up some of that colour. Try to push a little bit into the paper to smooth everything down. And then we are going to just come over to this side and take the cold grey 1. Cold grey 1 along that edge, and then in the lighter areas, and then obviously where it gets a little bit darker, that's where we're going to take the cold grey 2. And again, just pushing that in a bit more, and then I'm going to just use a combination, I think, of some of the cold grey 1 and the warm grey 1 over this side before it goes into that darker colour around the ear. Just because, again, it looks like it's got a bit more of a warmer kind of tone to it. So just blending a little bit of that in. And I'm probably going to use a bit of French grey as well, just because, you know, I love using luminance to try and soften out areas and make them super nice and blended. So obviously that's what I'm going to do. Just putting in a little layer of French grey. And then again, a little bit more of that cold grey 2, as we start to work towards the bottom of the ear where it gets a little bit darker. We've got a lot of like chestnutty kind of areas in there, but I'm just going to try and just keep everything looking super soft at the moment, so I'm not going to focus too much on adding anything like that. I'm just taking a little bit of this is a warm grey 3, which is a little bit darker, just so I don't lose that line against the ear. Then just blend a little bit of this, maybe like a bit of French grey over the top, just to smooth everything out again. And then we are going to just use some of the cold grey 3, this is cold grey 5. And again, focusing on the direction of the fur. Okay, so just again taking the cold grey 5, and just bringing that up and darkening. Before going in with the Payne's grey. So again, as always, just following the direction of the fur, just trying to keep everything sort of quite light and smooth and soft at the moment. And then again, I know this is very, very repetitive, but we're going to take the warm grey 6, and just marking out clumps of fur. And again, you can hopefully see how we're just layering up to create this sort of tufty fluff on the top of this little guy's head. And then again, as we come towards the real sort of like deep dark parts, that's when we're just gonna go in and add some of the dark sepia. And just using this dark sepia again, just to create some texture and a little bit more depth. And then we can just soften out if we need to, or add a little bit more of that sort of softer bluey kind of tone with a little bit of the Payne's grey. And then again, so I just added a little bit of Payne's grey over there, but I think I can just take just a little bit of the luminance, some of the silver grey, which again is just going to soften out that line and just make everything, yeah, just a little bit softer.